Welcome to an introduction to Jupyter Notebooks. My name is Brian Kafferkey, and I want to point out on the lower right hand part of this screen, you can see the link to my GitHub shared folder where you can get the slides as well as notebooks for this presentation. So feel free to go to that. If you can't remember the whole link, I know it's a long one, just look for B Kafferkey and then search for what's out there for shared or whatever. The link's here again, so you can have a little longer if you need to write that down. A little about myself. I'm a Microsoft Technical Solutions Professional, which means my goal is to enable people and educate them about all the great products, services, and ability of technology these days and how to apply it. And I focus really on the healthcare segment and on data and analytics, machine learning, and AI. So that's my kind of focal point. I have decades of IT experience. I am the author of Pro PowerShell for Database Developers, the best PowerShell book out there, and I'm not biased at all. I'm experienced in many industries, and I founded and lead two different groups, the SQL Past chapter, the Rhode Island Microsoft BI user group, as well as the Greater Boston Data Science, Machine Learning, and AI group. And feel free to connect to those. They're on meetup.com, so please join. Even if you're not in the area, you can always join. Sometimes we'll do some webinars and things as well. Also on LinkedIn, my profile is right there, but just Brian Kafferkey if you look for that. It's not that common a name. You'll probably find me. Also on Twitter under Brian Kafferkey, and please subscribe to my YouTube channel so you'll get all kinds of new great training as I develop it. Again, the link is there below. So what is a Jupyter Notebook? Put simply, a Jupyter Notebook is a console, such as the R console. If you use that, you type in a command, it renders it. Python console, PowerShell, DOS, Bash, where you type in the command and it renders the output. What's a little different about it as a console is it runs as a web application, so you get a web interface, and it renders things in place, but you can move between cells that you've entered things into. So it's more kind of keeps place of where you've entered things. But it is ultimately a console, I think. And it's an outgrowth of IPython, and I'll talk a little more about why they changed it, what they did. But it's open source. It supports actually now over 75 different programming languages. Pretty much if you've got a language, it probably supports it. And the idea behind it is, if you look on the right-hand side here, you can see an idea of it. The little gray box there where it says in, it's hard to see, but there's a statement there. And below it is the output of the statement. So rich visualizations can be rendered right in place. It's a very iterative type of environment, so that unlike a typical programming IDE where your idea is just you know what you're going to do and you write a program and you just run it and you're done, you deploy it and you put it to rest, Jupyter Notebooks are really designed to be more iterative. It's the idea is you're going to explore your data, you're going to look around, you want to collaborate, and you're going to share it. And the nice thing about it is you can kind of build it piece by piece. So each chunk of code you can say, does it work? And if it does, move on to the next piece. So applications for Jupyter Notebooks are, number one, I think, in teaching. I do a lot of videos. I like to watch as many training videos as I like to create. And I find most of the time when you talk about Python in particular, or Spark nowadays, they use Jupyter Notebooks as the teaching tool, the environment where they demonstrate code. But you're also starting to see it more with R and other languages. So it's becoming sort of a ubiquitous platform for teaching. It's great for collaboration as well because you can share it on a server. You can store it in GitHub and people can pull it down or render it right within GitHub, which is really cool. You can also put it on things like Azure Notebooks on Azure. Microsoft's cloud service supports Jupyter Notebooks. They just call them Azure Notebooks. And they support it, rendering and everything, maintenance. And the nice thing there is it's all secure and you can use it as your sort of point of reference for a company or whatever you want. It's great for research. And it's also good for exploration. So the research lets you really document. We'll see how it's great for putting all kinds of annotations right within your notebook. And exploration is just because it is iterative, because it is something you can collaborate, it's perfect for kind of where you don't know where it's going to lead you. With data science and machine learning, you don't really know end to end how it's going to go. Do you have all the data? How do you clean it up? What kind of data wrangling is needed, etc. And that's where notebooks really shine. Why use notebooks? They're really easy to use, as we'll see. You can see all the languages below that I mentioned, but all these languages supported. So if you use Python, Spark, Julia, or any number of languages, probably supported. I like the fact that you can do Spark right within the notebook. So PySpark and SparkR and SparklyR are supported there. And again, it's great for sharing. You got your data. Notebooks and data is all about sharing. It's not about holding it to yourself. And these are some of the companies, all these small little companies such as Google, Microsoft, IBM, etc., that use Jupyter Notebooks. So pretty much anyone who's anyone is probably using Jupyter Notebooks somewhere in their organization. The name is interesting though. Why Jupyter? Well, it actually is because the goal of that name is to emphasize multi-language support. So not surprisingly, the Pi is Python. The R at the end is R programming language, and the JU is for Julia. So the idea is to really emphasize that multi-language support. It's also taking a little bit of a name lift from Galileo's notebooks, which document Jupiter's satellites. So that's another kind of a nice spin because these are really famous notebooks that document this, and just really cool because they integrate also documentation with visualizations. But what is the Jupyter Notebook? So this particular slide is showing you kind of the screen, the GUI itself for Jupyter Notebook. We can see it's got typical drop-down menus. We can notice in the upper right-hand side it tells us the language. This is a Python 3 notebook. We can see the toolbar, which is really mostly meant to manage the cells, move the cells around, etc. And the cells, the input cells are in and then a number, so that tells you the sequence. You can keep track of where they are. And you can see like the first cell visible here is in 2, and then what it's doing, like %load ext. And the idea here, the green bar says that's the current cell. And if we were to press that little arrow with the bar to the right, it says execute the cell, that will run that cell and move to the next one. So the idea is we can step through our code. It's a little like a debugger in some ways. You can step through. Once it's rendered something though, it will retain the output. So you can save it, other people can look at it, and as long as they don't rerun the notebook, they can see the output, whatever you have, which is great because if it takes a long time to generate your output, say doing some sort of modeling or something, they can see it and you can make it becomes more like a report that they can look at as opposed to having to go through that work again. We can see the out3. If there's output, non-visual kind of output, but just text going out, you can see it labels it out3 that matches the input cell. And the cells can have any number. If you look at in5, you can see it can have any number of lines you want, but generally you try to keep it fairly modular because you want to be able to make sure that you can make sure each statement works. Anything created from one cell, you can think of all the cells as being one program, one script. The output is there more for documentation, I guess, but you can extract it to a single Python or R program if you like, and you can just run it as a program itself because it really is. But you can also pop around to different cells, make changes, and then re-execute it. The only thing I would point out when you do that, if you make a change to a cell and other cells depend on what you were doing, say like the value of a variable, you will need to re-execute any lines after that. It doesn't automatically adjust for that. You should be asking at this point, how do I get started? I want to use Jupyter Notebooks. I hope you do. The way to get started is to install Jupyter Notebooks. So the Jupyter Notebook is a service written in Python, and it's really a web service that you need to start, and once it starts, it'll bring up your browser and you can get going on it. The easiest way I think to get Jupyter Notebooks is, especially if you're into machine learning and data, is to install the Python Anaconda distribution. Not only do you get a lot of cool things like the Spider IDE and other great stuff, but you also get Jupyter Notebooks as part of that. And the link is right there, just anaconda.com, download. And once you have downloaded it, I have the Windows version. I'm on Windows, so I would go to the command prompt, which I can do from my start menu, or I can just go, I actually have it on my taskbar. And once I go to DOS, and again, you could do it with PowerShell, but I find that PowerShell doesn't seem to work as well with Jupyter Notebook, so it's easier to just use a DOS prompt. And here you just type in Jupyter Notebook. So let's, then you'll get this up and it will show you messages that it's starting the notebook service, and you get kind of messages related to that. And voila, you see the Jupyter Notebook interface in your browser. And if you look to the right, you can see creating a new notebook, it will prompt you with what language do you want that notebook to be in. So you do have to tell it the primary language of a notebook, and then it'll create the notebook. This example, we're creating an R notebook, and you can see in the upper right hand corner the R kernel is running. That's the language interpreter going on, and you can see the box plot and the visualization directly below it. Before I get into a demo, just highlighting the toolbar, you might want to go to my slides and get these so that at least you'll have this documentation. But you can see that there's the disk to save. The plus button will insert a new cell wherever you are. It inserts one, I believe, below it. You can use the cut and paste buttons, and the up and down arrows will just move cells, the current cell around. And the box interrupts the kernel, basically restarts the kernel. or stops it, and then the little cycle button will refresh the kernel. And the right-hand side tells you what kind of cell it is. And we're going to look at code and Markdown as the two types of cells. So let's go through a demo and we get a better idea how this all works. Okay, so I'm going to stop this. I had it running. So right here I have my DOS prompt. I like to put it on a taskbar. And I have a little batch file to help me get to the folder. When you start a Jupyter Notebook, it can be a pain to try to navigate to where the folder is where you're keeping notebooks. So best practice, I would say, or at least making your life easier practice, is to navigate to the folder where your notebooks are and then start it. So that's what I'm going to do here by using a batch file. So I have go to, and that little batch file just brought me to my folder where I have Jupyter Talks, I call it, and my notebooks are here. And if I do dir, you can see all those files that say IP, Y, and B, those are Jupyter Notebooks. So what I want to do now is just start my notebook service. And I seem to have caps lock on. I'll take that off. Okay, and the notebook service started, and I've got a bunch of notebooks here. So first thing I want to do is create a brand new notebook so you can see the process and see that it's not too difficult. So I'm going to go over here and say new. And depending on what language kernels I have installed, those will display, and I can choose what language I want the notebook to be in. So I'm going to choose the Anaconda 64 Python. And then it just puts me in a cell and says, you're good to go. Now, I can go up here and change the name of the notebook. It says, starts out untitled. So I can call it Brian's Notebook. Rename it. And here I can put whatever I want. Now, I can put code in here, but maybe I want to have some documentation. So what I'm going to do is, instead of code as the cell type, if you notice, I'm going to change it to Markdown. Markdown is just a sort of simplified version of HTML that's easy to work with by just putting these little pound characters like that, where you would normally put like an H1, H3. So a single pound means H1. And I can say Brian's Notebook. And I can press this little arrow with the bar next to it, and that renders it. So nothing fancy, it's just a title. It won't run code, it's not going to do anything, it's there for documentation. I can also do something like pound to get head 2, and just say something like notes. Now notice it didn't render, and that's because I need to change it to a Markdown cell, and then run it, and now it shows up. So let's do a little language. I might want to say something like A equal 400, and I can also, and written in the same cell, I can now say print A. I'm going to do Shift Enter, which is the equivalent of that run button, and it just outputs the 400. So there's nothing fancy here, but the goal here is to get you comfortable with what's going on in terms of the cells. You enter things, the output happens right away. We'll see more with more impressive visualizations. I don't remember everything I could type, so I'm going to bring up notebooks I've already got done. But you can see we have a file menu. We can do all kinds of things here. Edit menu. Most of the thing here we're going to use a lot is this button here. So if I wanted to do a new cell, I can just push the plus button, and notice it just gives me a new cell. I can move it up by just using this arrow. So I can do that. I can move it down again. And you have this will stop my kernel. Interrupted. This will restart the kernel. So you get all these things. And there's even some things to create some slides. But I just want to, if I want to do this like a slideshow, I'm going to say close and halt. So when you're done, you want to close the notebook because it is running under the service. So we close it. And now let's go in and take a look at something a little more interesting for a notebook. It takes a second. So this is a more impressive one, obviously. Again, this is nothing more right here than Markdown, which, as I mentioned. And you can do like dashes and things to get like bullet points and stuff. And there's more documentation online. So go to jupyternotebook.org and you can find all kinds of stuff about the details about how to do all that. But I typically just use these things, the header tags. And here you can see I'm importing a bunch of libraries like pandas and numpy and things like that. And I can do whatever I want. I can insert another line, say, okay, I'll just insert another line and just say print. It just outputs it, nothing impressive there. But you can see here it's kind of neat. Not only does it run this, but it does a nice visualization in place. This is more visualization, so we're using the Seaborn library to do some more visualizations. And this is pretty cool visualizations, but that's really Python. That's just rendering. I like that one. That's a nice visualization. A lot of good stuff here. And the main point of this is, so this is a Python notebook. If you've done Python in data science, you've seen these kinds of things. But I think the clear thing to me that comes across is this is a great way to document something. If you want to show the development of your data, tell the story of how you got to where you are in your data, then this is a great way to do it using notebooks. It's also, again, nice because you saw here I said print this and then execute it. Great for teaching because you can see what I'm doing, then you can see the output immediately. So again, it's kind of nice to have it together. Sometimes when you're trying to teach something and using an IDE, the IDE can get in the way of somebody learning. So that's a Python notebook. I'm going to go here. Now let's try an R notebook. Again, you notice the R in the right hand corner, and notice that this is a markdown cell, but notice that I can do a div tag. So pretty much any HTML I want to do, I can embed in a markdown and it will render it. Support CSS, all kind of good stuff. So you can do a lot with that. And then when you're done, just shift enter and you get it back. So that's just displaying a graphic, notes and things. And this is really kind of demonstrate this. And you see that actually generated now the output. So you can clear out the text and all that stuff, or you can save it with the visualizations and what you're doing. So this is just an example again of using the, let me just demo a little bit more here. Color wheel, and then a little cross compare. So this gives you correlation matrix, which is nice. The iris data set. So you got to close and halt, then go back. Let's do another one. As kind of an example I want to give here is how would you use the notebook? And I think this is sort of like how I say telling the story. You're doing data analysis, and you want to, I'm going to use the ubiquitous iris data set in this. But here I'm using iris, and I say, let's say I want to analyze a data set like iris. Well, I might start out by saying, give me a description of what's in there. And then I say, show me a summary of the columns, what's in those values. You can do a little output. Maybe I do some sort of a plot to see what's going on, histogram. And you can see, again, box plots. And by doing this whole thing, this is a great way to create supporting documentation, say to a predictive model. It says, this is my backup. This is why that model should be correct. Check it out. Do you agree? It's a great way to, so again, collaborate and use Jupyter Notebook. Okay, something else we can do with notebooks is we can create slides. And this is an example of that. Notice I have this drop down, which I did not have before, which is a slide type. And that's really only used for when you're doing slides. And the way you can get to that is by doing the cell toolbar. Normally it says none, so notice it disappears. But what I need to do is go to cell toolbar and change it to a slideshow. And then it gives me this little slide type, and I can create it and really look at these as slides. The idea really is to save this and export it as a notebook using the utility for that. Which I have it later, I'll show you. But I can also do something interesting. I can, it's here, go into presentation mode, and you get this nice little toolbar with utilities to do things. And I can work on my slides there, which allows me to edit each individual slide and play with my diagram or my slideshow. And I can even test my presentation. So notice it gives me little arrows, and I can say, let me go through this. And I've got a slideshow. Really, I could do a slideshow right within the notebook if I wanted. But I can also extract it so it's a completely separate HTML file. Okay, so I'm going to leave this. Okay, something else I want to point out is a really nice feature. And this really gets back more to Python and how it works. But you can do something called cell magic, which you see with a % sign, or you can do line magic, which is denoted by 2% signs. So an example is I want to do an operating system command like ls, which is really a Linux specific one. But by doing that, I can do ls %, and if I press shift enter, it just does a directory listing. I can do a single %, so that would be an example of a cell magic. $pwd gives me the present working directory, %alias, list file. So I can do all kinds of cool stuff. But when I want to do like a command, which is this now would be specific to my OS, in this case Windows, I can do an echo and dir, and the double % allows me to do that. And I would recommend go online. I don't want to belabor this with all different possibilities, but just search out for that. Use Bing or something, search down and find out what all the different cell and line magics are, but there's a bunch of different ones, some of them here. I find just going through different notebooks is a great way to explore and see what's possible. This is kind of a fun one because it's running PowerShell. So you notice it clear that out. It's kicking in PowerShell through DOS and then running get child item, which is the same thing as the ls command. And here you can see you can run an R script inline, and this is just doing more directory commands, etc. You can have all kinds of cool stuff. So let me close out of that. Finally, I'm just going to show something. I'm not going to run it. I don't actually have the library to run Python with R. I need to get that. But one of the things I want to show you is by doing the magic with load ext, you can get R loaded, even though this is, you notice to the right, this is a Python notebook. So what I'm able to do is load pandas, create a data frame, and then use R and use ggplot to do something. So it's great because a lot of times I find I like the data handling and things that Python can do, but I really like the visualizations you can get from like ggplot too. So you get kind of the best of both worlds. And I actually really believe that's a great way to marry the two because both have strengths and weaknesses. So I hope to see more of that kind of integration. Let me get out of this. And finally, I'm going to do one last thing. Finally, I don't have Spark installed on my machine, but fortunately these notebooks are great because they save the last rendering. And what I can do here is, what's it called? A resilient data set. So here you can see that PySpark is being brought in, along with a bunch of related PySpark libraries. And you can set the Spark context, and then you can create your resilient data set, RDD. And then you can do things like getting the raw count and taking some rows from, etc. So the beauty of this is we get something that is probably one of the most simplest interfaces you could get, the Jupyter Notebook, but we have the power of Spark or Hadoop or something under the covers that we can do massive amounts of data and tap into it. And we have the flexibility and resiliency of the languages we're using, like Python, R, Julia. So you get this great combination of everything. And again, it's just a nice way to do it. And when you're playing with something like big data, you're probably going to want to play around and try to avoid those big hits. So it's a good way to develop and think out what you're doing. Even if you decide to convert it to just a plain script, that's fine, but it's a great place to sort of initially develop things. Well, let me go back to my slideshow here. So I do also encourage you to look at Jupyter.org. That's where the Jupyter Notebook is maintained, and they document it, and they'll tell you more about it. And you can even experiment online without installing Jupyter at all. They have a link there. You can just play with it. There's also a gallery you might want to look at, which has all different kinds of demonstration notebooks. So we looked at this as just kind of refreshing what we went over, but this is showing how you can integrate R and Python in one notebook. And this is an example of using a resilient distributed data set, RDD, with Spark. And you can see it's bringing in the PySpark module and then doing things in Spark. So this is all in slides. And here we, again, kind of reviewing, but we did slideshow, so you can kind of set up a notebook to be a slideshow. And you can still use it as a regular notebook as well, so it doesn't render it any less useful. One thing I did want to also show, continue recording, is to go to here. And let me go to, so I am now in my repository. I'm going here quick. I'm going to go to Jupyter Intro, and I can actually go in here and say I want to see this R notebook rendered. And notice it does. Let me go back to a better one though, because I want something a little more, something to look at. And you can see the GitHub actually has rendering for Jupyter Notebooks built in. When you get GitHub to support something like that, I think you're saying it's pretty ubiquitous at this point. I know, my favorite new word, ubiquitous, but I think it's become so common and so just everywhere that even GitHub is just building in support for notebooks. So hopefully I've sold that point to you. And again, because it can do that, you can share your notebooks without anyone even have to install Notebook or anything. They can view your notebooks right there, which is a nice ability. A little about the architecture of notebooks. So what I like about it is, again, it's a very decoupled architecture. You've got the user interface with the browser. The browser is just the user interface. There's a notebook server that we started up. So the notebook server is running in the background, but the server is not coupled with any given language. We can see the kernel on the background, which could be a language kernel of any type, Julia, Python, whatever, Ruby. It just interacts with the server, and so you can plug and play whatever language you want. The actual storage of the notebook is in a JSON file, and that can be converted using NB-convert and things too, which we'll see. Just the utility for NB-convert is this, and there's lots of things on there. I'll probably do a presentation at some point about using NB-convert, but there's lots of YouTube videos and Bing it and whatever, and you'll find it. But it's a great thing too, so you can export and convert notebooks to slideshows, PDF files, just extract the script, whatever you want. And I did want to mention too, a way to really get a lot of value out of notebooks is collaboration, and a way to securely collaborate is to use something like Azure Notebooks. So you can go to the link here, notebooksazure.com, and I actually tend to prefer using notebooks within Azure Machine Learning Studio because it kind of gives me a whole tool set. My notebooks are there, my machine learning experiments are there, my data sets are there, everything's kind of in one place, so I like that. So if I want to give you a kind of an example of that, continue going. I think I have it right up here. So you can see this is my Azure Machine Learning Studio area, and I can just click on it and it will get rendered. And notice it's just Jupyter Notebooks. You can see that in the upper left, but it's integrated on the cloud, so what's nice here is I can easily share it and do things with it, so it's great for collaboration. And if you're looking to get into data science, machine learning, all that good stuff, and you need that sort of entry level, especially if you're looking at the cloud, I would say this is a great place to go just to get sort of a foothold. You know, not everybody wants to jump in both feet. You want to kind of play around and experiment, and there's no better place than notebooks on the cloud. So wrapping up, really use cases for Jupyter Notebooks, really anything you want. I like them across the board. It's great for learning, but it's particularly good for teaching because everything's very in front. You can see everything as it's happening, and you don't have to focus much on the tool because it's so simple. It's good for collaboration. Again, lots of cloud places you can share it, save it, collaborate. Even GitHub supports rendering, so we know that's really good. It's good for research because of all that documenting. You can document everything in flow, and somebody else can maybe make corrections to your research. And I like it more probably than anything is because of the iterative ability to play around. The data doesn't look right. Let me add some code to that cell that will clean up the data, remove null values, etc. So it's really great for that. Thank you for listening. Again, if you like this, please subscribe, tell your friends, you know, that type of thing. Let people know. I'm doing a lot of training videos, so I appreciate you taking the time and hope to see you around. Thank you.